Welcome to PolyCast, a civilization podcast focused on game strategy. Here's PolyCast's Lisa QNL Bang and ModCast's Wouter Locutus Snijders with Christopher Velocyrix Hartpence on his project, Candlebray.
Candlebray has a pacing that falls somewhere between Europa, where it can take a long weekend for anything of significance to develop, to Civ, where you can potentially play a pickup game in the course of a day. Somewhere between those two is kind of where Candlebray is falling, pacing-wise, and I think that's about right. I should mention something else, too, as an aside, just because I know that Solver will appreciate and approve this comment. One of the things that I enjoy doing is coming up with a set of rules, and then immediately after I come up with a set of rules, trying to find at least one reason to break it. Solver sometimes pulls me back from that and tells me, that adding needlessly complex layers to the game, and a lot of times he's right, that you'll notice in the game there is some of that survives, and I think that's a good thing, because you get this sense that, yes, these are the rules, this is the framework of the game, but by God, there's a way to break those rules if I really want to. And I think that, especially if we use that kind of rule breakiness in, like for instance in the Honor Infamy system, to allow the really bad players, the really bad seeds, to find ways of breaking certain ironclad rules of the game, that's really cool, I think. I think it adds a nice touch.
Just to start at the beginning, as it were. So how did Candlebray first get started?
Well, that's an interesting story. Way back in 2002, Civ 4 was just a thought. Someone, and I forget exactly who, had posed a question asking if you could put any team together you wanted to design the game, who would be on it? And I remember being completely blown away when I saw my own name on the list. I was thinking, wow, not only is that unexpected, but it really says that the work that I've been doing strategy guide-wise and everything was really resonating and really making a long-term impact on the community. But at the same time, I was thinking, well, okay, there's no way these professional designers are going to invite me into that club. So my chances of actually getting on that team are essentially zero. So that got me thinking about, well, what kind of a game would I like to put together if there were no rules at all, if there was no sense of constraint? What would that look like? And just started playing with the idea in the back of my head. And when I'm designing a game, whether it's a board game or a computer game or whatever, typically I'll play it out in my head. I won't actually have any moving parts or moving pieces at all. Just a couple of rules here and there, see how that would look in my head, add things to it, take things away. And, in a day or two, I had a rough outline, so I started my own thread about that and realized after I'd posted it that that's probably a bigger project than I can really handle. Maybe I'll just go take it back. And I was just kidding, sorry. And when I went to check the thread the next morning, there were people from 4 different continents who had thought it was a fantastic idea and were signing on to help. So after that, it kind of took on a life of its own.
So it was partly the fact that you didn't anticipate the sort of reaction that you got that started the project, basically.
Yeah, really. I mean, it was so unexpected. I mean, the whole thing, from the initial mention right up to, having 30 or 40 people joining the party, so to speak, and offering to help with art and coding and storyboarding. And it was overwhelming. And, of course, with all those people enthused and excited about it, how could you say no, right? I mean, at that point, it was already happening. We were just kind of along for the ride.
I'm just wondering, what sort of people do you think this game should appeal to? It sounds like it started off more community-oriented, but at the same time, is it for the community exclusively or somebody else?
Well, I would definitely not classify Candlebrae as a casual pickup game or a beer and pretzels type game. There's a lot more going on within the framework of the game than that. So really, my sense is it would appeal to diehard strategy fans, people who, like Blake, for example, just to put a name out there, who really dug into the guts and the inner workings of Civ 4 and really pushed that game far beyond what anybody had envisioned that it could be or could do at the outset. Those types of people, I think, would be really drawn to this game. To give another example, anyone who enjoyed the story elements of Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri would be completely drawn into this world, I think.
What do you think the reason is that this game appeals to Civ players? And I'm not saying that this is necessarily Civ 2.0 or whatever, because that's not the intention, I think.
Right.
What about the game would appeal to Civ players?
A couple of different things. First and foremost, any Civ player who has any interest at all in living, breathing history, which I think is a majority of Civ players, because Civilization, if it's excellent at anything, it's excellent at giving you the tools to create your own history, to write your own story. Candlebrae is very much following in those footsteps in the sense that, yes, we have a very deep and detailed backstory, but what we're also hoping is that you can contribute a verse to that. You can use the framework of the game to develop your own stories and write your own ending to the history that we've already got in place. And I think that's going to appeal to a significant portion of the Civ community. And, again, anybody in the Civ community who enjoyed the story elements of Alpha Centauri will quite probably find themselves very caught up in the story of Candlebrae. Granted, it's fantasy setting versus a sci-fi setting, but the two are usually a lot closer than most people consider.
I agree with that. I definitely see my share of people who like both things. Would it be your intention that people are familiar with the canon before they start playing the game?
In most cases, or at least in far too many cases that I've seen in games I've played, the story almost seems to be bolted on as an afterthought to the game itself. Come up with some mechanics, you put the rules into place, and oh, hey, we need a story to kind of make it game-ish, so let's make something up real quick that sort of more or less coincides with the mechanics we have on hand. And unfortunately, you can always tell when that happened. And so in this case, literally the story came first. We had a story long time before we ever had a functioning prototype, and the story informed us what we needed in order to make the game a reality. So it is not strictly required that you have a great familiarity with the story elements of the game because they're woven very tightly into the fabric of the game. You'll pick up a lot of that just by playing, but of course, because we paid a lot of attention to the story details, if you are familiar with the game's story background, you'll see a lot of that in the game, and I think the readers of the story will really appreciate that.
The story interact with the game as you're playing, or is it basically like Alpha Centauri? Well, there's this story which exists on the side, which you can read at another time, but during the game, there's really basically just civilization or something similar to it.
Well, the story does have certain interactive qualities to it, and what I mean by that is, for example, there is one faction that you can play, one of the noble houses that you can play, where early on you have to make a decision. You have access to this very powerful character, and you can either opt to keep him with you, which, of course, will have bearing on not only the game, but on the way the story is told. You can keep him in the family, keep him in the neighborhood so that he's working directly on your behalf, or you can assign him to be the lead investigator into the assassination of the king, which is the event that sparked the Civil War to begin with. And if you do that, if you give up your family member in that way, not only does that boost your honor score, which of course has ways of shading and coloring the outcome of the game as well, but it significantly changes the arc of the story. There are lots of decisions like that, no matter which faction you play, that your decisions not only have an impact on you immediately, but they will also change the overall arc of the story and could dramatically affect the outcome of the history of the basin itself. So in that sense, yes, you are very much interacting with the story elements.
Can we maybe take a little step back, because I'm not sure that everyone who's listened to this actually knows what Candelbray is. Can you explain a little what sort of game is it and what world is it set in, that sort of thing?
Sure. Well, in simplest terms, Candelbray is a 4X style, turn-based fantasy game set in a completely unique fantasy world.
For our less informed readers, what does 4X actually mean? Because I don't actually know either.
4X is a designator that is used to describe all of the Civ-style games, Explore, Expand, Exterminate, and there's another X out there that I don't quite remember, but it's used to describe Alpha Centauri, Civ-style games. Call to Power is in that family, and we very much are a part of that. The genesis for the game structure and mechanics can be traced back to Master of Magic, Europa Universalis, and of course Civ, with a lot of nods to Alpha Centauri in particular because of the way that that particular game handled the leaders, each leader having his or her own agenda and personality, and that agenda and personality then bleeding into the play style for that group. And, of course, the really in-depth story elements that that game brought to the fore. Just fabulous. And how old is Alpha Centauri now? More than 10 years old. There are people today who can just rattle off all the major quotes from the characters of that game. It's quite unlike anything that's come after it.
What would be the goal of the game? What are players trying to do? And how do you win? Can you win?
Well, yes. In the prototype we have now, which is rapidly advancing beyond the stage of prototype and into the first full-blown version of the game, the win condition is simply to dominate a significant portion of the basin, which is broken into 60 provinces. So control of 40 of those 60 provinces is sufficient to consider yourself the dominant power and thus the win. And that cuts down on micromanagement. Once you get to that point, is it really necessary to force the player to take over every province in the basin? No. I mean, at that point, it's obvious who's going to win the game, so why not just call a halt to it and stop there? That is the only win condition that's enabled at the moment, but there are others that are planned as we continue to expand the parameters and the scope of the game overall. Stay tuned for that.
What are some other ideas that you have for victory conditions?
Well, one of the upcoming pieces that we'll be putting into the game is a diplomatic model that will be merging with what we've got right now, and that's going to open up a whole new host of possibilities, including the potential for a cooperative win, an out-and-out diplomatic win if you can manage to improve or increase your relations with all of the other rivals, and so they all have this deep and abiding respect for you. You could easily win that way. There's the possibility of an economic win if you control an overwhelming monopoly positions where resources are concerned, or simply have a staggeringly higher level of economic development than the rest of the basin. That would certainly make a win inevitable, and at that point, why not just call it in your favor? The other interesting possibility there is an element to the game, which is the honor and infamy system. And based on your in-game actions, you can earn honor points or infamy points, which actually change your abilities and things that you can do or get away with in the game evolve as you proceed down that path. There's certainly a possibility down the road for actually having an honor or infamy win condition based on your being a paragon of virtue or an absolute pariah that everyone hates but also fears.
Yeah, Infamy is one of those things I guess you don't see in every game of this type. Can you explain a little how that feature works? How do you change your Infamy factor? How do you gain points? How do you affect the system?
Sure. Right now, and this system will evolve over time as well, the primary means of changing your honor and infamy score is in terms of how you react to, like for example, if you invade a neutral province and you take it over, you are prompted with some choices. How do you want to treat your newly acquired subjects? Are you going to rape and pillage? Are you just going to sort of take control over it and let the local magistrates do their thing? Or are you going to intentionally go out of your way to reassure the people that you're not going to do them any undue harm? And based on how you respond, you either get more money and more funds up front at the expense of your honor, or the opposite case where you don't get as much money, but the people are automatically a bit happier with you. And over the course of the game, your cumulative decisions like that will begin to unlock other doors and other possibilities. For instance, if you get so far down on the infamy scale, your people will be too afraid of you to revolt. You won't have to worry about that because you're basically ruling from a position of everyone's deathly afraid of you. On the other hand, your tax revenues won't be as high because everyone's deathly afraid of you and they're not out working as hard or as diligently as they could, and there's not really much incentive for them to be as productive as they might otherwise be. So it's a balancing act and a trade-off, and based on however you want to play the game, you can really see some dramatically different outcomes.
Yeah, I was pretty struck by that as I was playing the game, how easily your citizens can become discontents, which I think is actually probably a more accurate depiction of ruling.
And it's about to be a lot harder to maintain control. Right now, it's still relatively easy, although you're absolutely right that pretty much anything you do will upset somebody. Your people are extremely difficult to keep happy unless you just leave them alone, which, of course, what politician ever does that? So then you're right back into making somebody angry.
Would you say that that's mostly the procedural rhetoric of the game? Like, that's the lesson that this game is trying to teach? It sounds like you are trying to put certain messages here.
Well, now that's a tricky question. I would say I'm not really trying to send a specific message, but there is no mistaking or denying the fact that when the game was put together, its chief designer, that would be me, has certain predisposed beliefs that bias the game, the structure of the game and the rules that govern the world. So, yeah, in as much as that's true, I firmly believe in the gridlock notion of government, which is the government that's not doing anything at all is probably the one that people are happiest with.
Yeah, we'll leave it at there. How would you say that Candleberry has changed during time that you've been working on it? Good 7 years now.
Oh, wow.
Would you say that the original vision has mostly been retained or otherwise?
The original vision was a lot simpler than what we have now. And I guess this is our version of feature creep, story creep, I guess you could call it. In the original formulation of the game and the backstory, no real thought had been put into, okay, so the kingdom's in the Civil War. Why? What were the events that led up to that? It was just sort of glossed over in the beginning. The mechanics were very much simplified, mostly because in the earliest stages I was doing them all in my head. They amounted to little more than mental coin tosses to decide how things would proceed. So all of those systems have grown up and become a lot more complex, a lot deeper, but hand in hand with that, the story and the history of the world is a lot deeper and richer and really creates a rich tapestry and a rich backdrop that the game unfolds before. In a very real sense, you become not only a participant in the story, but also one of its architects. That was not in the original vision necessarily, but I think has become the central theme of what we're trying to do now.
And in the years that you've been working on this game, a lot has changed in the world of sort of indie gaming. In the second demo that you brought out really feels like Clash of Civilizations and the sort of indie games that were available a couple of years ago. But in that time, we've seen games like AI War, Fleet Command, and Defense Grid, and a whole bunch of games that basically one guy programmed in 6 months, and it's a complete experience. It really feels like a full-price game almost.
Right.
Have you guys considered how has it affected your development? Have you maybe looked at, hey, maybe we need to start over and look at some of the new methods that these teams are using?
That's certainly always an option, and anyone who is familiar with the Candlebray story and the history of our development, we have actually started from scratch, by my reckoning, about 7 times. So we have, on numerous occasions, gotten to a certain stage in the development and for a variety of reasons decided, nope, you know what, we're ditching it all and we're going to start again. Actually, I think we're probably stronger for that, and I say that because not only did we learn a lot from each iteration, but also we were very adamant from the beginning that we had no set time frame. We had no, well, when's the game going to be done by? We weren't going to say, oh, it'll be out by next Christmas, definitely, because we're not making any money at this. There's not a publisher breathing down our necks. We can polish it and work it and improve it until we're happy with it. And at that point, we can release it. That has frustrated a number of people over the years, I know, but I think it served us very well, and I am quite happy with what we have ultimately released, and even better with where we're going in the future. So is there a possibility that we could chuck it all and start again? Maybe. I hope not. I think we've done that. We've been down that road, and I think we have a certain momentum behind us at this point. But anything's possible. I certainly wouldn't want to see it, but I can't write it off completely either.
I was asking Solver, how many hours have you spent in this game? And he said, I don't even want to imagine. Been very much on and off, but certainly a fair amount of time. What would you say about your time commitment? Because I feel that a lot of Candlebray is more about the creation experience, at least how it is so far.
I would totally agree with that. Over the course of the project, we've had probably upwards of 100 different contributing members on at least 4 different continents. And, there have been periods when I have basically lived, breathed, eaten, and slept Candlebray. I would hazard several tens of thousands of hours over the life of the project. And that goes from everything to scheduling Skype meetings, which when we had 40 or 50 active members at a time, we used to have 2 sets of meetings because the time frames involved were so crazy that I'd have to have one in the morning, to cater to one side of the time zone, and then stay up till 3 or 4 the next morning and do the one for the folks living on the other side of the planet, and kind of summarize between the two just to kind of keep everybody on the same page. And of course, the project has waxed and waned a lot. It got very quiet for a while and really distilled down to just the 3 of us, myself, Solver, and Hex, who is single-handedly the person who's been responsible for creating the lush, beautiful look of the game and kept it all very consistent and quite professional looking. Solver is our code guru. They're the real driving forces behind the game, and they keep me inspired.
How many playtesters / artists / programmers were involved in this game? Of course, people can wear different hats, but, I kind of wanted to get an idea of just a general estimate of how many of each were involved.
Let's see. If I had to ballpark it, I would say we have worked with no less than 15, 18 different coders at different points. Some obviously were more productive than others, but there's that. A lot of the coders were around more in an advisory capacity than an actual lines of code capacity. But that was very helpful too, because coming into this thing, I knew less about code than I know what goes on under the hood of my car, which is to say, not very much. Art-wise, ballpark, I would say at least 10 to 12 artists at various points, some working on terrain. That was before we went with the province-based map, and we ultimately shied away from that. Others working on concept sketches and just trying to wrap everyone's collective heads around, well, what does a Nilragi look like exactly? You know, what is the architectural style of the basin exactly? You know, a lot of those questions needed to be answered before Hex could really dive in and give us the cohesive look that we wound up with. Then the writing, granted I've done an awful lot of it, but I am by no means the only writer. We've had at least half a dozen notable contributors in that vein as well.
Are most of the people who are involved in this game men?
Most of the ones I have talked to, yes. We do have a handful of women players and female participants in various aspects of design, but they have been in the clear minority.
I mean, I'm probably sure it's probably just because of the nature of the Civ community that there aren't that many females in there, but Solver says, unfortunately, far too few women enjoy burning, plundering, fortification breaking, and general mayhem. Now, this one doesn't, but...
Well, and I think that's probably a fair point. I think that just the genre and the subject matter and the way it's presented may be at times off-putting or just not the thing for the majority of women, and that's understandable, I suppose. There have been some. We've always had at least a few women working with us on the team. My wife is a very regular contributor, idea-wise, to the game, and like Solver, she tells me when I veer too far down certain paths and puts me back on the straight and narrow. In addition to the computer game, there are a total of 4 books, which are, I guess you'd say, the canon materials that the game is grounded in. We retain complete freedom and control of the books. We don't have to worry that we're offending or not being politically correct in the story or blah, blah, blah. We can pretty well do what we want, how we want. If you're a fan of the books, one thing you'll very quickly notice is that there are a large number of extremely powerful and prominent women characters. I think that's at least some indication that women have a strong voice and a strong place in the history and the backstory and the inner workings of all things Candlebrae, and I think that's a good thing.
And if, say, other people want to get involved as well, is it as simple as going to the forum and participating in discussions, or do you guys sort of hand-select team members?
Well, our doors are always open as far as there's certainly no shortage of things that need to be done. And unfortunately, there is a scary shortage of hours in the day, so we are always limited by our free and available time. And yes, if anyone has any skills that they bring to the table, be they writing or artistic or code-wise, we can find something for you to do. And it's as simple as sending us a PM saying, hey, I'm interested. What do you need help with this week? Or if you'd rather not participate that directly, then by all means, there's always the forum discussions. We have approached several individuals who were active in the forum and approached them privately. We need a few extra testers. Would you have time for that? So we're always reaching out to the community and plucking people behind the curtain, so to speak, to put them to work on various facets of the game, from testing to modifying some XML files. Contact us at any point and sign on. We'll give you the backstage pass, we'll give you the grand tour, all of the above.
Do you have like a revenue model for this thing down the line? Is this meant to be freeware, or do you ever want to start selling this game?
Not this one. This one we're doing just to prove that we can. Now, already in the back of my head, I have ideas for a sequel. I'm in no particular rush to get to that point, but I would just as soon keep polishing what we've got, really tell the story as well as we can tell it, and I think that will be the single biggest selling point for the potential sequel and our ability to charge a little something for the sequel. But to be honest with you right now, I'm having so much fun working with the free one that I'm perfectly content to say the pay version will come out eventually and leave it open-ended at that. This game is free. It's always going to be free, and we don't really have any major concerns of making money from this. I've got a couple of other things I'm doing to bring in some cash, and my hope is I can start paying Hex and Solver for all their tens of thousands of hours of hard work. But honestly, at this point, there's no amount of money I could give them that would repay them for everything they have done. So I think we're all pretty much in agreement that what we do here and what we create out of our collective effort is really because we're enjoying the ride, not because we're looking for a paycheck.
Call in today. In North America, the number is 301-637-7659.
That's 301-637-POLY.
In Europe, 44121-288-7659. That's 44121-288-POLY.
You can Skype us at the PolyCast or email us at thepolycast@gmail.com.
The only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about.
For more information on PolyCast,
Our sibling shows ModCast and RevCast,
Or about PolyCast in general.
Log on to the series' official website at
Polycast.net.
thepolycast.net.
We started the development with a particular engine and are in the process of switching to a different engine since the second demo has been released, and that's been an amazingly smooth process. Granted, there are always some snags, but really, Solver and I have both just been amazed at the ease with which the switch has gone to this point, so good stuff.
Great.
And when will people be able to get their first glimpse of this new engine?
There we go with the time frame again. Let's see, that's the magic question, isn't it? My stock answer is as soon as it's ready. But of course, nobody likes to hear that. So I can make up a date for you if you'd prefer. Let's say Valentine's Day 2016 as an outer boundary.
Overall, how would you describe this game's appeal? Number one, to the creators, but also number two, to the players.
Well, I think anyone who has spent time giving their talents and themselves to the game loves it. We've had a lot of contributors over the years, a lot of people who've contributed some, gone away, come back, despite all the long odds against it. 7 years ago, more than 7 years now, when we started out, everyone knew that the odds were incredibly stacked against us ever actually producing anything. And we've had our share of doomsayers coming in and telling us why we were going to fail and so forth and so on. And conventional wisdom held that they were very likely right, especially when the main designer had no artistic skills or coding skills, which is pretty much the kiss of death for an independent gaming project. But here we are. Not only here we are, but here we are with a functional, quite fun game and 4 books and the beginnings of a fan base, and that's fabulous. Over the years, it has matured and it has grown up and it has gotten this deeper, richer feeling and depth to it that you can't just get banging an idea around in a conference room for a few months and then whipping up some code around it. There are a lot of games that come out perfectly playable and really quite fun that do that. But one thing those games don't have is anything approaching the level of depth and detail and story that we've been able to build into this game, and that's going to continue over the next 7 years and beyond that.
The reason why I like Candle Gray is I feel that I'm on the forums a lot, and I hear so many complaints how Civ is made, and then whenever I end up in one of those complaint threads, I always think, why don't you try making your own damn game? And it's nice to see that somebody actually has.
That's me channeling the voice of Solver, by the way. I could try to do a good Russian Latvian accent, but all I would do is embarrass myself, so I will refrain.
Damn.
Not very damn much. Am I allowed to say damn? Anyway, edit it out if I'm not. But
Jeez, man, Wouter, you took my question. No, I'm
Okay, well, I have another one.
Okay.
Gone too far down the road of, okay, but so like if it's a full moon on a Tuesday, we can do that. No, that's way, so.
Are most of the people who sorry, I just okay. I know Dan's gonna cut this out though. Oh, by the way, you don't have to worry so much about this being that formal because there are a lot of things that go out in editing, so...
Oh, no problem. I figured as much, yeah. I was hoping as much anyway.
Record date March 6, 2010. Candleberry sound clips copyright Chris Hartpence. Civilization 4, Warlords and Beyond the Sword sound clips copyright Take-Two Interactive. Copyright Civilized Communication at civcom.net.